Hello everybody and welcome to this, part 2 of my response to ContraPoints' video, Autogynephilia. Part 1 was honestly kind of fun. Once I realised there weren't going to be any decent arguments, it really took the pressure off and I thought, okay, this isn't going to, present any meaningful challenge to the idea of autogynephilia, so I can just generally comment on ContraPoints' poor arguments. And that's what I've been able to do, and I'm looking forward to more of that in this, part 2. So let's jump in.
And because according to Blanchard, I only like guys because being filled up with their dicks makes me feel like a girl, which is what I'm really into. And behavioral because Blanchard just...
Okay, I mean, I should point out that literally in part 1, that kind of seemed like it was what you were getting at. You were saying that, like, the big part of what you're into is your relationship to other people and how you feel that reflects on who you are. You literally said that, like, your sexual encounters are nice to you because they make you feel like a woman. Like, that's literally what you said in the video. So I'm not really sure how you can disagree with that.
And I mean, okay, you can slap a Greek word on anything and make it sound scary, fake, and pathological, but I think this is an especially unfair way to characterize my experience, and here's why.
Okay, I mean, it sounded to me like that was accurately describing a lot of what you've said from your own experiences, but I'll be interested to see why you think it isn't describing your experiences.
Cis men seem to really like their own penises, and taking pictures of their penises and sending them to other people.
I don't really know if that necessarily follows. I mean, the taking pictures of penises thing, it doesn't translate to being turned on by your own penis. Even, I mean, even a certain degree of aesthetic enthusiasm for one's penis, I don't think could be properly understood as, like, attraction to it. And yeah, I don't know, like, the idea of being sexually attracted to your own penis, that's just, I don't think that's a thing which most people seem to have. I think most men, if they have enthusiasm for their penis, it's as an extension of their manhood. And they're like, yes, check it out. But not like, oh, that's so hot.
Are they behavioral autophallophiles? I can make up Greek words too, Blanche.
Can I just point out, this isn't even like a good argument? Because, like, okay, let's say it's true that everybody is attracted to themselves in some sense. Let's say that's true. Well, that would still make it different that certain biological males are attracted to the idea of themselves being women. Like, even if you said that everybody is attracted to themselves, that wouldn't make all of these different things equivalent, because there's a difference between a biological male being attracted to himself as a biological male and a biological female being attracted to herself as a biological female, and a biological male being attracted to the idea of himself as a woman. That's a different thing, isn't it? It's, it's being attracted to the idea of yourself not being who you are. It's that when you look at your biological maleness, you think, oh, no, I don't want that. I want to be something else so that I can be attracted to myself. So even if we were to accept this idea that everybody is actually attracted to themselves, and to the same degree that autogynephiles are attracted to themselves, that still doesn't change the uniqueness of the fact that autogynephiles are attracted to the idea of themselves as something other than what they are.
Women touching their own breasts during sex or while masturbating is not at all uncommon. Is that anatomical autogynephilia? Twitter...
Again, like, here's the issue. Okay, let's say this is true. Again, well, here's the difference. Biological females have breasts. Like, there's a big difference between a biological female enjoying the idea of having breasts and a biological... Well, I know that men have breasts, actually, but, large breasts. And a biological male enjoying that idea. These two things aren't the same by any means.
It seems what's going on here is a lot of pathologizing of normal female sexuality when it exists in trans women.
First of all, I would argue it's not normal female sexuality when it exists in males. And by the way, even if it was normal female sexuality, of course you would pathologize it if it exists in males. Like, that just seems obvious, right? It's like, yeah, I think it does make sense to pathologize something that's normal to females if it exists in males. that's not particularly shocking.
I don't think I realized the extent to which my own sexuality felt like a demonic possession or alien infection until I...
Why do people pathologize my sexuality? Or, by the way, my sexuality felt like a demon. It's just... Why must they self-own themselves so much all the time? I can't believe people pathologize my sexuality. Then, like, 5 seconds later, my sexuality felt like a demon inside of me. Okay. Alright, whatever.
I was free of it, thank God. When I had male hormones in me, I needed to have an orgasm like every day. I was turned on mainly by visual arousal cues. I was at a Kinsey 1 relative to my birth sex.
I'm sorry, like, you needed to have an orgasm every day. Wasn't the whole point of this video supposed to be that trans-identified males aren't, you know, like, perverts, basically? I mean, that was the word ContraPoints used. I feel like perverts is kind of a quite charged term. But, I mean, you're saying that before you identified as trans, you needed to, or rather, okay, before you went on hormone therapy, you literally needed to orgasm every single day until you basically castrated yourself, right? Like, would it not be accurate to describe, pumping a biological male full of estrogen as castration? I might be wrong about my terminology there, but it does sound like what you're describing here is that you were so, I don't know, whatever the word is for literally needing to orgasm every single day, which that's not normal. Don't get me wrong, okay? I've gone through periods in my life where I have been orgasming every single day, but those have been abnormal periods, right? And actually, it's, I would say, more normal to be able to go several days without needing to do that. So yeah, that's not normal. And then, like I say, it seems like you basically castrated yourself by pumping yourself full of female hormones when you're a biological male. And I'm pretty sure that I'm correct in saying that does have the effect of castrating you. And now you don't have the same sex drive. It just seems like a strange detail to include when we're supposed to not be pathologizing your sexuality, to say you were totally ceaselessly sex crazed on a daily basis until you castrated yourself. And
I never need to have an orgasm. I'm turned on mainly by interpersonal cues like intimate physical contact or close emotional moments. I'm at around a 70-30 attraction to women versus men, and the paraphilic kinks have vanished without a trace.
At least on some counts, this would almost seem like a biological male's idea, like a stereotypical biological male's idea of female sexuality. Like, achieving orgasm is optional. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I'm not going to act as if I'm somebody who just, is handing out orgasms left, right, and center. But to be like, yeah, when I became a woman, I realized, turns out that, yeah, having an orgasm, it's they can take or leave it. And then, of course, the other thing is bisexuality. It seems very porn sick, this particular notion of female sexuality.
So my interpretation of all this is that I have what is a pretty typical female sexuality, at least.
I mean, I don't know, like, at the end of the day, I'm not gonna pretend that I have the most complete sample size of every single female's sexuality. I'm not a female myself. I can't imagine myself ever pumping myself full of estrogen and claiming that I suddenly now have access to female sexuality, or would be any more able to recognize what a typical female sexuality is. But generally speaking, my inclination is to say that no, most women aren't porn stars. Most women aren't just constantly lesing off all the time. And I would say most women are pretty on board with orgasms. And I mean, sure, maybe not as much as you who apparently needed to orgasm every single day. But yeah, I would say that women, they're pretty on board with the whole orgasm thing. So I'm not sure if your experience of female sexuality is entirely representative.
One of the reasons why Blanchard has to come up with elaborate terminology like this is he takes as foundational the presupposition that trans women are psychologically more like cis men than cis women. His studies therefore...
Oh yeah, and that's never been evidenced by anything that trans-identified males constantly do. No, yeah, I mean, there are a few things I could be more comfortable saying than that trans-identified males are much more like men in terms of their psychology. And I mean, yep, you haven't done a good job at contradicting that in the video so far.
Blanchard's insistence on classifying trans women's sexuality as a variant on male sexuality makes it seem paraphilic and unusual that trans women want to have sex as women. But what do cis women want to have sex as?
Again, it's like, it's this bizarre misunderstanding where it's like not understanding the relevance of, and here's the thing, okay, you know, the idea of denying biological sex is thrown around a lot nowadays, and this is an example of where it's there in the subtext. Like, the implication of this is that biology is irrelevant. You like, literally, ContraPoints' take here is that it's not remotely of interest that biological males want to have sex as women, because I guess ContraPoints doesn't think the fact that trans-identified males are biologically male is of any significance whatsoever. And that's kind of what people like me talk about when we talk about denying biological sex, to say that literally the fact that these people are biologically male and obsessed with the idea of having sex as women is literally irrelevant, that they're biologically male. And of course it is very relevant, and I mean, yeah, like, obviously, you know, non-trans identified biological females are going to want to have sex as women, but the difference is the reality is they want to have sex while acknowledging the material reality that they are women. It's not that they want to have sex while trying to create this nonsense idea of some woman essence that's inside them and that's truly being expressed through their sexual encounter. They're just women, which is radically different from biological males who can't have sex with women because biological males can't be women, so they invent this idea to try and say that actually they've transitioned to being a woman and that their sexual encounters reflect that reality. These are not the same things, and it's bizarre that you're so... I was going to say unwilling, but no, frankly, it seems unable to recognize the significance of this distinction.
But I kind of suspect that cis female heterosexuality is not best described as raw physical lust for the male body.
Okay, I just want to stop here because basically this is responding to a very specific claim which I personally wouldn't sign off on, which is that, like, I guess Ray Blanchard, I think, argued that that true sexuality is raw sexual lust or something like that. And ContraPoints is basically saying, that's not true. Which, yeah, okay, I agree with that. Yeah, I think it's wrong to say that sexuality has to be raw sexual lust or whatever it was.
You don't find a
Honestly, I'm really annoyed because my computer keeps freezing. So I keep having to, and when it freezes, it falls out of sync. So I have to come here and, you know, try to get it back in sync. I say come here because I like to switch to the full screen when I do it. So if you've ever wondered how I get my computer in sync, I used to clap, but I actually realized that didn't work as well as what I do now, which is I just go beep, 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 ba, 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 ba. And then what I can do is slow it down, and I can, like, because the ba, it's like as soon as the lips go apart, the noise comes in. As soon as the lips go together, the noise stops. It's beep, beep. And then because I've done that, I can just find where the noise is and just sync it up with where my lips come apart. And I wouldn't mention it usually, but I've had to do that about 6 times so far. And sometimes I don't have to do it at all. So I don't know what it is that caused it to happen, but yeah, it keeps freezing. Fortunately, I don't think this section matters that much. It's, like I say, just responding to this whole thing about, like, what's raw. I think it's raw physical lust was actually what I said, but yeah, what is this raw lust, and and do biological females experience it and all that kind of stuff, which is like interesting, but it's not really relevant to the whole autogynephilia thing.
This is not a story about Christian's rippling abs and his tight buns. It's not a story about wanting a man. It's a story about being wanted by a man. This is how the whole
again, it's just so weird, because like, okay, let's say that this is true, and you're saying, okay, so female sexuality is about, well, okay, I guess heterosexual female sexuality is about being wanted by a man, and that's what it's about. Which even as I say that seems like it's probably not true. But let's suppose that is true. Even still, why does it not make sense to talk about how biological males having that same sexuality could relate in a fetishistic sense to their trans identity? That's what you haven't really been able to argue. You've basically spent a very long time being like, but biological females could have this same sexuality. And it's like, yeah, sure. But like, we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about why it is that biological males become trans-identified and the possible relation that might have to some kind of fetishistic idea that they actually want to be female. And actually showing that this sexuality is common amongst women actually just increases the case for this argument that that it is legitimate autogynephilia, right? I don't know.
But I fundamentally resonate with the wish to be wanted. I want other people to think I'm sexy and want to f me, you know?
I'm so confused. You're just arguing that you have autogynephilia. Essentially, what you've just done here is described what you consider to be like the sexuality-oriented experience of being a woman, and then said, yes, that's what I'm really into. And it's like, okay, so autogynephilia, right? Like, it's just so bizarre to me that this is what you're doing. You're arguing, you're presenting and describing in detail this particular sexuality that you consider to be a woman's sexuality, and then saying, yes, that's what I have, and I'm really into it. It's like, yeah, okay, autogynephile, right? I'm just so confused.
The notion of the vanity of woman is a misogynistic trope that originates in male projection. It is the assumption that women enjoy looking at themselves in the same way that men enjoy looking at them, and are hence complicit in their own objectification.
Okay. What I kind of anticipate might be about to happen is that the argument is going to be made, and that's what's being done to trans-identified males. And it's like, okay, again, I could already go through the fact that lots of women are concerned about autogynephilia, more so than men. Like, women, shockingly, this might be crazy for you to hear, Contra, but women don't like the idea of being a fetish, really, and they don't like the idea of men claiming that their fetishes make them women. Much more so, and this is much more offensive to women than it is to men. So already, if you're going to argue like, oh, this is just like men being misogynists, it's like, but it's really not like, it's not as manny as you think. This is a very woman-y objection. Although, yeah, you have done a good job, I guess, at not engaging with that reality. So kudos there. You've really helped to make your argument stronger by only dealing with one specific aspect of what you're objecting to, which is the two men who seem to have really been instrumental in academically establishing this idea while ignoring all the women who are concerned about it. Nice job. But the other thing is, you're saying that, like, men are obsessed with women and, like, what women look like and just women. And that, in order to obfuscate that, they try to make women be obsessed with themselves. That's what you're doing. Because you were obsessed with being a woman. You really wanted to be a woman to the extent that you got hormones without even checking with your doctor first. So you were obsessed with this idea of being a woman. And what have you done? You've now made it so it's women being obsessed about themselves. And you've done that, first of all, with your argument. Like, a big part of your argument here has been basically saying women are obsessed with themselves. So that was a big chunk of the last 10 minutes that were covered in this video. You saying, yeah, women are obsessed with themselves too. Look at all these things women do that show how obsessed they are with themselves. And two, of course, you've declared yourself to be a woman. So it's fascinating, really, that you have not realized that the very thing that you are setting up, presumably to criticize, is exactly what you are doing. That just as these men have, out of their own obsession with women, painted, naked women, and then to try to obfuscate their obsession, they have imagined that it is the women who are obsessed with themselves. You, likewise, have had this obsession with women, and to obfuscate that, have declared yourself to be a woman, thus making it so it is a woman obsessed with themselves. So that's the actual reality. Now let's see how Contra is going to presumably try to argue differently.
I think the concept of the autogynephilic transsexual woman is a combination of this trope with a homophobic trope. Misogyny casts women as narcissistic, vain, in love with themselves, and homophobia casts queer men as hypersexual perverts.
Okay, again, I thought, this was going to be where it's going. But the point is, you're saying that you cast, or rather that misogyny, I put the cart before the horse there, that misogyny casts women as vain and in love with themselves. And meanwhile, you have literally declared yourself to be a woman and are in love with yourself. And that has been evidenced by innumerable things you've said throughout this video. So you are literally doing misogyny by taking your fetishistic obsession with being a woman and declaring that it makes you a woman, and thus you are saying that women share this self-obsession with being a woman.
Autogynephilia acceptance. So this whole video I've been treating autogynephilia
Autogynephilia acceptance. That's very relevant to the current beef about whether or not autogynephilia is acceptable.
It's fine. There definitely are men who get turned on by wearing women's clothes or thinking about having a female body, and as paraphilias go...
Okay, so there we go. There definitely are men who are obsessed about this kind of stuff, but none of them would actually be trans-identified. That's... If you're going to argue that, fetishes aren't a relevant factor in trans-identification, then that's what you have to be arguing. You have to be arguing that while there are men who have these autogynephilic tendencies, that's got nothing to do with them literally declaring themselves to be women. And that is absolutely absurd.
This is very harmless, and I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. But
it's very harmless for men to be misogynistic. I mean, at the end of the day, kink shaming and all that kind of stuff is a pretty substantial video for a different time.
But the question of whether genuinely autogynephilic trans women exist is more complicated.
How can it possibly be more complicated? It's like, that is absolutely absurd to be like, oh yeah, sure, we know that there are trans-identified males, and there are males who are obsessed with the idea that they're women and have this big, massive sexual fetish about it. But it's just, how can we say whether or not these two things intersect? I mean, that sure is complicated. No, it's not. It's intuitively obvious that those two things would intersect. And it's just bizarre to suggest that they wouldn't, and to suggest it's complicated.
The reason most trans women consider the label autogynephilia to be such a stigma is that
it's true. Is that it's true, and they don't like when people recognize what exactly they've got going on. They really don't like it. So could you just stop it? Could you just stop pointing out the obvious fetishism going on here. Stop it, guys.
Have the idea that you can't be both a woman and an autogynephile, hence the offense we take to being characterized in this way. However, things get messier when you look into this some more.
Okay, so that was kind of like, I don't know if I really have anything to respond to there, because I mean, obviously I would disagree. I don't think that biological males are women, but yeah, basically the take there was that pretty obviously, if you're a woman, you're not really like obsessed with the idea of being a woman because it's just the basic reality. Whereas if you're a biological male who's not a woman, then it makes sense that you could be obsessed with the idea of being a woman. And that's why lots of trans-identified males don't like when you point out that they're autogynephiles. So yeah, that's basically what ContraPoints was saying.
Are there some genuinely autogynephilic transsexuals? Well, at first glance, the answer is yes. I mean, there's always one, isn't there? In this case, that...
I mean, there's always one, isn't there? Or like, loads more than one. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, if I had a choice between saying it was just one or it was all of them, I would say it was all of them. Like I said in part one, I don't think it is all of them. I think it's more likely it's like, I don't know. I mean, what would be the point in putting a percentage to it? But let's say around 50%. You know, but sure. Like if I was forced to be like, oh, it's either it's one or it's all of them, I'd be like, it seems more likely it's all of them, to be honest.
There's a blog called Cross Dreamers devoted to it. It's been written about by Zinnia Jones and Julia Serrano. So within the trans community, this isn't even controversial. It's not provocative. It's not politically incorrect. But how do we make sense of this? Well, my thinking is that
the good news is that, don't worry, in the trans community, it's not politically correct to consider womanhood a fetish. So that's great.
And I think the strongest piece of evidence that it isn't essential is that even the rare trans women who identify as autogynephilic admit that after transition, the cross-sex fantasy and arousal vanishes, yet they continue to prefer living as trans women.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Basically, the claim is that even while it might start off as, autogynephilia, eventually that feeling goes away. But when you think about it, it's not really surprising. When you do anything for a long amount of time, the novelty of it wears off. It's kind of like, in my head, I'm sort of thinking this is a bit like arguing that somebody who kind of gets adjusted to, there's a particular term I'm looking for, but I can't really think of what it is, to a certain kind of drug. Eventually they will, like, it won't really have an effect on them. It will just become their regular thing. And yet, first of all, they'll still take the drug, and second of all, they'll still be a drug addict, even though they're not having the feeling. And that would seem to be a logical, intuitive kind of way of understanding what's being described here. Something which might originally have started off as a fetish will, if you do it for long enough, driven by that fetish, you do it for long enough, will become just, it will lose its novelty and it will no longer be sexually appealing to you. But that doesn't change the fact it's a fetish. It doesn't change the fact you're a fetishist, even while you're not actively experiencing the benefits of the fetish. And I would argue you still are dependent, in a way, on that fetish, and you're dependent on fulfillment of that fetish, even as you don't feel a direct sexual gratification from it. That would just seem to be, to me, a very obvious explanation for why this would happen. And, I think it makes more sense to me than saying, these people are driven by this sexual fetish to do this, but then afterwards they stop feeling it sexual, so it must just show that really it was just their true being a woman that was actually coming through. And that's why they're not turned on by it, because they're truly women, rather than actually just being autogynephiles. That doesn't really make, I don't think that, that seems less logical than what I just laid out then. The other thing, of course, is that not all trans-identified males allow their trans identity to become such a all-encompassing thing. And I imagine for those individuals, they're able to sustain the fetishism of it substantially longer. Sure, once you start to get into, this is literally coming from the person who admits that they were completely obsessed with sex, like needing to orgasm every single day until sexually castrating themselves. This would seem to actually, reflect the reality that, sure, I guess once a fetish brings you to the point of sexually castrating yourself, I imagine that any kind of gratification you get from that will feel no longer necessarily sexual, but that doesn't mean that the fetish isn't continuing. Again, this just seems obvious. So basically, you're stuck with a situation where, one, the fetish can continue even while it doesn't feel directly sexually gratifying, and two, the fact that for a lot of trans-identified males, they will not even take the actions that might cause the fetish to no longer feel sexually gratifying. And there are a lot of, let's bear in mind, a lot of these trans-identified males are just people who look no different from me, who just have female or, woman-looking anime profile pictures on Twitter and probably masturbate to, sissy hypno porn and stuff like that. It's, they'll identify themselves as women, but actually they're easily staying within the bounds of they've not become so involved in this idea that they're women that it's just become just a regular thing. And just actually to apply it to a actual fetish, like I would assume that if, let's say, you're just a full-on really committed cuckold, that's always a classic fetish. And I guess sure, the first times you do it, it's gonna feel really sexual. It's gonna feel like you're gonna whoa, oh boy, this is. Because I would assume if you're going to get into cuckoldry, you probably started off I'm kind of into it, but you're afraid to do it. So then when you actually start doing it, oh boy, wow, I love watching this other man just really go to town on my significant other. You're probably really into it. But if you did it all the time, you're going to get less and less into it. And if you somehow got to a point where your cuckoldry just came to encompass your whole life, which admittedly I think it's harder to do that than it would be to allow autogynephilia to encompass your whole life. But let's suppose you did. You really just somehow just all the time you were just yes, cuckold, just always a cuckold. You wear your little kind of chastity cage to work. And you're just constantly texting your wife I can't wait until I get to watch you do the stuff with another guy. I imagine that after you just constantly do that, it's not going to be as sexually gratifying for you. It's going to become less and less of a thing, because it's just going to be something you get used to. But it doesn't become less of a fetish. And I guess that's the point. Getting used to a fetish is not the same thing as it becoming less of a fetish, and that seems to be what ContraPoints is arguing here, that as you get used to a fetish, it becomes less of a fetish, which is absurd.
So what happens when you transition is you actually pair bond with yourself, forming a kind of stale, sexless marriage with the woman you've become. And if that sounds like it doesn't make any goddamn sense at all...
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that sounded like it made a lot of sense to me. When I heard that, I was yeah, okay, that makes sense. Which, I don't know, I mean, maybe to some people that doesn't make sense. To me, that sentence kind of made sense. If you become obsessed with this idea of yourself as a woman, then once you actually start to just live as a woman, in big air quotes, I can imagine it just comes to a point where it's you just live with this version of yourself that's a woman. And that would, I think describing that as a stale marriage you enter into, that makes sense to me. So that doesn't sound like it makes no sense to me, but let's hear what's about to be said.
Well, it's because it doesn't.
Okay. If that sounds like it doesn't make sense at all, it's because it doesn't. Well, I mean, to me it did sound like it made sense, so I guess that's because it does.
Are you saying that trans women are a man and a woman inside this? Why do they continue falling in love with other people? I can't even start with this. This video...
That logic doesn't really make any sense. So you're basically literally, I guess you're just taking things really literally. If we're talking about autogynephilia, the attraction to the idea of yourself as a woman, I think it makes sense to conceptualize that as being similar to the idea of a relationship between two people. There's, you as a biological male, and then there's this idea of who you want to be, which is, and like, let's not forget the fact that lots of trans-identified people literally give themselves, well, most of them give themselves new names. They kind of create a whole new personality for themselves. I think it makes complete sense to say that you could understand that as being similar to being two people. Now, of course, are they literally two people? No. But I don't think it makes sense to just say, well, they're not literally two people, so you can't possibly understand it in terms of like a relationship to themselves. And obviously the other objection, which was even more silly, was why do they get into relationships with other people? Well, like, okay, let's just, like, there's probably some complex psychology there, but quite simply put, apart from anything else, polyamory exists, like people being in relationships with more than one person. So even accepting your logic of like how you're framing it, it still doesn't make sense as an objection.
Video's too long, I'm getting cranky. Look, this seems like the point where Occam's razor shuts down Blanchard's theory. Like, okay.
I really find it strange that like ContraPoints' whole shtick is just getting progressively more drunk in videos. And it's like, you know, I mean, can I just remind everyone that this is supposed to be ContraPoints' job? Who shows up to a job drunk? Especially when your job is supposed to be like using your brain and your words to try and make sense of stuff. It just seems weird to just be like, yep, I'm just going to get drunk and just start talking as if I know what I'm talking about.
Maybe I subconsciously created a female alter ego with which my original male ego has fallen in love. But maybe lots of things. Maybe I subconsciously want to become my mother so I can my father. Maybe.
Okay, so the issue here is that you were trying to present reasons why autogynephilia doesn't really make sense, and your main piece of evidence was that people, after they have transitioned, you know, full on, still want to do it, even though at that point it seems like they're not really getting direct sexual gratification from it. And the point is that there are alternative explanations. So to say, well, maybe there are alternative explanations, but maybe there aren't alternative explanations. Yeah, sure, but that doesn't work as like, the point is that your argument are like, it couldn't possibly be autogynephilia because of the fact that they still do it after they've stopped getting direct sexual gratification from it. That argument still flops. So yeah, you've got to recognize kind of the context of the argument. If this is being given as an alternative explanation to what you're saying, well, just say, yeah, well, maybe, but maybe not. That doesn't really work. The point is, well, it still functions as an alternative to what you're positing.
Or maybe I'm just a woman who wants someone to fuck me every once in a while.
Yeah, maybe. No, I don't think that's the one thing which is definitely not a maybe. There's no, maybe I, a biological male, I'm a woman. No, I think if there's, you know, there's not much certainty. And I think, you know, with your maybe this and maybe that, yeah, sure. There are a few things in life which are certain, and we can always say maybe. But is a biological male a woman? No, never.
And I'm not going to say that these people are lying about their experiences, because that would be a terrible thing to do.
It's terrible to say that people are lying about their experiences, because people never lie.
I've already admitted to things in this video that I wouldn't tell my own diary on my deathbed, but I just don't. This theory doesn't describe my conscious motivations to...
Okay, yeah, this is an interesting thing. So basically saying, if this was actually how I feel, I would tell you. Okay, the only issue with that, and it's just one small issue, is that you literally have already explained why you wouldn't do that. You already went on a whole thing about how, like, trans-identified males perceive autogynephilia to imply not actually being a woman. So there you go. Like, sure, I can believe that you'll admit a lot of things, but the one thing I don't think you'll ever admit is that you're not a woman. So yeah, this isn't like, there we go. Like, your whole argument of, if I actually felt this way, I would tell you. And let me just clarify, okay, I don't think you'll admit this to yourself either. So it's not as if I think you're actively, like, consciously lying. I think you're lying to yourself. I've said before that, you know, a lot of the time these gender identity extremists will make really terrible arguments, and you think to yourself, wow, you know, they're doing such a terrible job selling this idea that, you know, like, how dishonest of them or whatever. And I've gone on record saying that I don't think they are dishonest. I think Like, they genuinely believe the terrible arguments they're saying, not because it's convincing, but because they're lying to themselves and they need to believe that their arguments are actually good. And that's what I believe in this case too. I think that ContraPoints wouldn't be literally contradicting so much and actually making the case for autogynephilia by mistake for any other reason than because ContraPoints actually knows that this is true deep down and is lying and trying to just argue against it almost just like as a charade. Like, there's not really a kind of academic intellectual intent behind this. It's just doing the performance of arguing against it to symbolize a rejection of it, not an actual effort to present substantive criticisms of this idea.
But you know who does love this theory? She's been there literally the whole time. You know, I realize that by talking about this, I'm subjecting myself to a lot of ruthless...
I just want to point out that you had Abigail Cockbain there, the radical feminist, and it's like, okay, so you do recognize that this idea is popular amongst women and not just some idea that's driven by men's weird sexuality then. That it's not just that, like, Ray Blanchard or whatever is obsessed with trans-identified males. Like, lots of women are concerned about this too.
6 foot, wide-shouldered man in a dress. It's really more of a hospital gown. The evidence will show that the defendant is not a woman.
I do like how ContraPoints has got better at representing radical feminists in a way that actually allows Contra to argue against them. So this time, you know, obviously they'll say things like, it's a dress, when it's not a dress, it's a hospital gown. These are the kind of, I think this is, you know, like, ContraPoints can actually work with this. As long as Cockbain doesn't actually say anything too intelligent, Contra should be fine.
But a male pervert role-playing as such for his own twisted sexual amusement. Abigail, what are you holding? It's for horseback riding. Your Honor, I would like to admit into evidence the following...
That was a pretty good no you. No you are a fetishist. Look, you've got a riding crop. I mean, it's such a good point, isn't it? Like, and to be honest, it's shocking that gender identity extremists are so scared to debate gender critical feminists, because it's like, you can just point to their riding crop and point out what a hypocrite they are. You know, like, Helen Joyce can just be there with the riding crop going, this person's a fetishist, and you can go, hey Helen, I see your riding crop. Looks like you're a hypocrite. Pretty clever, right? Contra, yeah, see, again, Contra's really brought Cockbain down to the level that I think Contra can respond to, and I appreciate that. I think it's good progress. Not towards truth, but, you know, I think it's a more kind of competent delusion, which I appreciate. Before, when it was like Cockbain was actually, like, literally arguing against Contra's position and Contra couldn't respond to it, that wasn't so good. But now I think Contra, like, Contra can do this. Look, it's a riding crop. What a fetishist.
I bought that stuff for Rocky Horror. What? Rocky Horror Picture Show. I used to do Frankenfurter. Your Honor, I'd like to admit into evidence the following photograph. That's me at E Street Cinema in 2014. This one's on the house, Kiwi Farms.
Okay. That doesn't mean you're not an autogynephile, though. You're just saying, I had oh, don't worry, okay. I only did this fetish when I had an excuse to do it. Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm sure that's not how other people with fetishes will act. I'm sure there's not lots of cross-dressers who will only do cross-dressing when they have some kind of excuse to do it.
But when you're living as a man, there aren't a lot of socially acceptable occasions to try out cross-dressing.
But that's literally the point I was just making. I'm so confused by this. Like, what is the argument here? It's like, hey, I had all of this weird, well, okay, maybe not weird, maybe weird's too harsh of a term, that's a bit loaded, but I had all of this sick discussion. I had all of this cross-dressing stuff, like this fetish stuff, this stuff that is like what a dominatrix would wear, or somebody who's being dominatrixified. I had all of it, but I had an excuse. But the only reason I had an excuse, or need an excuse, is because I really desperately wanted to do it. But I'm not an autogynephile.
In fact, it actually causes gender dysphoria because it makes me feel like a male cross-dresser. Sometimes trans women start out with a fairly male conception of what women wear. I guess that's true.
I'm so confused though, because like ContraPoints, here's the issue. Since then, I know that Contra has dressed up like way more provocatively and kind of exhibitionistly sexual. That's probably not a term, but yeah. So it's kind of like this doesn't really work as an argument. It's like, oh yeah, I used to have this idea, like, you know, I was just all about kind of displaying myself in this really sexual way and being really exhibitionist and all that kind of stuff. But now, like, as I've become a proper trans woman, now it's different. And it's like, you look, it's like, oh, wait, it's worse.
Don't have this conversation with someone who started transitioning 5 months ago. Go find someone who transitioned decades ago and talk to them about their experiences as women.
This is such a weird take because it's like, to be honest, it was ContraPoints' decision to make this whole thing about whether or not Contra is an autogynephile. Like, and to be honest, there's actually been like 2 sections on this. There was like the bit halfway through, which was all like everything ContraPoints has ever done, like sexually, and now there's this bit which is kind of about like what ContraPoints has done in, you know, like videos in the past. So the point being, in both cases, like Contra has at 2 points decided, let's make this about me. Again, like the whole narcissism thing's kind of funny, but let's make this about me and my, you know, whether or not I'm an autogynephile. And it's like, well, you know, and then getting defensive, like, well, why are you putting this all on me? I only started transitioning 5 months ago. And it's like, okay, well, no, we're just saying that it's a thing. And am I going to say it's definitely a thing for ContraPoints? I can't read people's minds. I can only think, oh, it kind of seems like it based on the fact that Contra in this very video has said things that sound a lot like autogynephilia. But ultimately, you can never know somebody's mind for certain. But you can make assumptions, you can make inferences, and you can observe general social trends. For example, I don't need to know a single, like, I don't need to be able to point to a single trans-identified male and go, this is definitely an autogynephile. But when I see that autogynephilia is clearly a thing amongst males because of, you know, sissy, hypno, porn, I can then say, oh, that would very obviously be relevant to the fact that there are also males who consider themselves to be women and identify as women. I can say that without having to be able to point to a single specific example. So yeah.
I think some cis people will be very congratulatory towards me for making this video. Some of them will say things like, why can't all trans people be as calm and rational and open about their experiences as you?
I don't know. I mean, would the world be better if every trans-identified person were exactly like ContraPoints? I get the impression ContraPoints is less crazy than a lot of, you know, like, you don't have to spend long on Twitter until you're like, wow, a lot of people are just straight mental. And I get the impression Contra isn't so much a complete lunatic. So I suppose that's a positive. But yeah, I would say overall, there are certainly, I mean, you know, it's kind of pointless, isn't it? Because trans-identified people, you know, should just not be trans-identified.
Well, I'm very happy if you found the video elucidating, but I'd like cis people to think a little bit harder about why not a lot of trans women talk about this. It's humiliating.
It's because it's true. I'm thinking really hard about why it is that trans-identified males don't talk about autogynephilia very much. It's really difficult. Could it be the reason why they don't really talk about any of the objections to gender identity extremism very much? Because they're good arguments and they don't really have responses to them. And ultimately, like, not everybody has ContraPoints' ability to just completely fill a video up with fluff such that you feel like you're getting an argument when you're not. Could that maybe be it? Like, genuinely, Contra, like, the embarrassing thing is, this video wasn't great, but it was probably, like, the best job I could possibly conceive of a trans-identified male doing at defending against the accusation of autogynephilia. Like, this is probably the best possible video that could have been made, and it still wasn't very good. So why don't other trans-identified males talk about this? Because they would just do a worse job. I mean, how many like discount ContraPoints have cropped up recently, and they're very bad. So it shows that, you know, ContraPoints has a talent of nonsense. And I can respect that. But ultimately, yeah, it's not really surprising to me that when you have this accusation that's so obviously true, so obviously based in reality, it's so obviously a fetish, you don't really want to engage in that. You want to keep it as a secret. You want to hashtag no debate. And oh my goodness me, let me tell you, recently I've had so many instances of like people trying to challenge me to debates and me saying, okay, I'll do it, and then them backing out, stuff like that. We know you don't like to talk about this stuff because you can't defend this stuff. It's not. I thought about it.
It's exhausting, and it's required me to publicize a detailed analysis of my most private sexual feelings.
No, it didn't. You chose to do that. I like that. Like, you chose to do it. And why did you choose to do it? It's so interesting that I can talk about this topic, and I can talk about loads of topics without ever really getting into the nitty-gritty of my tendencies. Whereas you seem to just jump at the opportunity and then turn around and be like, oh, it was so difficult. I had to tell everybody about what I've been doing sexually, and they were all probably looking at me and judging me, and it was so humiliating. Yeah, I bet it was. Thus ends the first tale in the epic saga of responding to ContraPoints' videos on gender identity in order on the channel, unless, of course, the degeneracy video also touched on that, because I couldn't be bothered to respond to that because it didn't seem like it would be relevant enough. I didn't want to jump into that video right away because I was like, no, I want to jump into a video that I'm like more confident will actually touch on the issue, and it did. It was a video on autogynephilia. What was the main conclusions, the main takeaways? Well, first of all, it seemed like Contra was very wrapped up in like this very specific notion of autogynephilia, and basically saying, well, it's it's not as if every single person is an autogynephile. It's not as if like there's just two specific groups and like it's all very simplistic. And yeah, sure, I guess you're right. A lot of time spent on like, well, it's kind of like an alternating of saying that you're not an autogynephile while saying lots of things that make you sound like an autogynephile, which is fun. Overall, you know, one of the big regrets in my life is that I didn't respond to lots of these videos when they were initially coming out. Because it was when I was having a hiatus from YouTube, and you know, I think I would have a much huger channel if I hadn't taken that hiatus. It's genuinely something I would change. If I could go back in time and be like, Michael, get on these videos now, respond to them. But then having said that, was there even necessarily as much of a market? It seems in a way like things have really taken off, so who knows, maybe everything worked out for the better. And either way, I guess I'm glad that I can make this video now when I'm sharing it with 4,000 subscribers, rather than what I would have been doing if I did it back then, where I'd have been sharing it with like 400 subscribers. So who knows, maybe all things work out for the best. But then having said that, why would I want to share this video with that many people? It was kind of pointless, wasn't it? Like there weren't really any good arguments made. So I guess I'll just say thank you for watching. Please do like, share, subscribe, get the bell on, comment to let me know what you thought, and feel free to give on Patreon if you want. I do appreciate anybody who gives on Patreon, and I'll just say thank you to my current patrons. In addition to their names scrolling past on your screen right now, I would like to give a special thanks to last month's patrons, Kaiser, Mojave, Bianca, Anon, Devon, and Jillian. You're all very appreciated.